Senator Averil power to move her motion. Thank you. Senator.
Thank you. Minister, I've tabled this adjournment debate this evening to highlight the need for a public register of the beneficial owners of companies. Arguments for such a register were set out very eloquently in the Irish Times last week in an article by Sorley McCaughey, who's the head of policy and advocacy with Christian Aid. Minister, basically the problem is that at the minute companies are able to use complex legal structures to separate their legal and their beneficial ownership in such a way that it's impossible for anybody to know who actually beneficially owns the company, who is getting the money from it, who is pocketing the profits from that company. The EU is looking at bringing in the revision of the anti-money laundering directive. Discussions are ongoing in Brussels at the minute about the possibility of bringing in a requirement right across the European Union for all member states to maintain public registers of the beneficial owners of companies. And the reason I've tabled this debate is to ascertain from the Minister for Finance if it's Ireland's intention to support that process. And indeed, if in the interim the government would look at, ahead of any EU requirement, actually taking the step and bringing in such a register ourselves. The difficulty is that under the current system, money launderers, tax evaders and terrorist groups are able to rely on the secrecy that is provided by the complex network of trusts and shell companies to hide money and to hide the beneficiaries of profits. Christian Aid have pointed out the damage that this is doing to African economies. The African Progress Panel that was led by Kofi Annan estimated that in its 2013 report that Africa loses twice as much in illicit financial flows as it receives in international aid, twice as much. Some estimates put capital flight at as high as 850 billion a year, depriving countries of vital capital and revenues. Much of this money flows out into shell or phantom companies. In the Democratic Republic of Congo, for example, 5 mining contracts were awarded to anonymous companies in the British Virgin Islands at a vastly under market rate and then sold on at market rate to major extractive companies. The estimated cost to the DRC was 1.35 billion, or twice the entire health and education budget of that country. The identities of those who owned and benefited from the British Virgin Islands companies remain unknown to this day. Public registers of the real and beneficial owners would address this problem and not only provide a way to identify those who were profiting and hold them to account, but also to deter such practices from ever happening. From Ireland's point of view, introducing such a requirement before it is enforced on us from Brussels would be another way of us demonstrating our commitment as a country to promoting the highest levels of transparency in the areas of international finance and taxation, and would seem to be a sensible position for us to adopt. Indeed, the Department of Finance's recent publication on Ireland's international tax strategy talks at some length about our commitment to transparency and tackling tax evasion, and justifiably points to some of the successes achieved in that regard under the European presidency. Taking this step now and introducing a public register of beneficial owners would be consistent with that policy and show that we're serious about really taking on the issue of tax transparency. It would only affect a very small number of companies, and the vast majority of companies, the vast majority of companies in Ireland are small companies, family-owned companies with very simple structures, and where they're listed on the stock exchange and it's very clear who their major shareholders are. The issue that I'm talking about affects just 1 to 2% of companies that use complicated structures to separate their legal and beneficial ownership. It's precisely the type of practice that we should not tolerate and we should actively be trying to stop. France and Britain have already indicated that they are supportive of bringing in a public register regardless of whether or not it is introduced in the new EU money laundering directive, and I would urge that we should do the same here. So I appreciate that you're here to answer for the Minister for Finance, but I hope that you can indicate to the House if the Minister supports proposals for such a requirement at European level, and if indeed Ireland will take the step, like France and Britain, of going ahead and doing it anyway ourselves in the absence of any European requirement as part of our overall commitment to showing that we are serious about transparency in international finance and taxation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Power.